There is one border on Earth you can see from space. At night. Not because there's a wall, because of what's missing. This is the Korean Peninsula, photographed from orbit. The bottom half burns with light, one of the richest, most wired societies humans have ever built. The top half is dark. One dim point where the capital is. And here's the part that should keep you up tonight. The people on both sides of that line are the same people. Same language, same food, same family names. In millions of cases, literally the same families. 80 years ago, this was one country. It had been one country for 1,300 years. Tonight's investigation: what can switch off half a nation's lights? The answer involves a world war, a civil war that legally never ended, and, I promise this is real, a borrowed map and 30 minutes. Let's follow the evidence. Start with how deep one country goes, because it matters. Korea unified in the year 668. Then it stayed that way, through dynasties, invasions, 5 centuries of a single royal house, while Europe redrew itself every other Tuesday. By 1900, Korea was one of the oldest, most homogeneous nations on Earth. One language, one court, one people. And a nickname, the Hermit Kingdom, earned by wanting mostly to be left alone. It was not left alone. In 1910, Japan annexed Korea, and for 35 years ran it as a colony. Names Japanized, the language pushed out of schools, hundreds of thousands conscripted. And, file this detail away, it's about to matter enormously. Japan built its factories, mines, and dams in the north of the peninsula, and kept the south growing rice. One country, 2 economies. Nobody planned what came next, but the wiring was already in the walls. August 1945. Japan is collapsing in days, not months. Soviet troops are already driving down into northern Korea. The nearest American soldiers are 600 miles away, and in Washington, someone realizes nobody has decided where the Soviet zone should stop. So, on the night of August 10th, 2 exhausted American colonels are handed the problem. Their deadline? About 30 minutes. Their equipment? A wall map of Asia, borrowed from National Geographic. Neither man is a Korea expert. No Korean is in the room. No Korean is consulted. One of the 2 colonels, a man named Dean Rusk, who will later run American foreign policy for 8 years, looks for a line that keeps Seoul on the American side and lands on a convenient circle of latitude, the 38th parallel. He admitted years later that it made, his words, no economic or geographic sense. They send it upstairs. Washington approves. And here's the moment historians still argue about. Stalin, whose army could have taken the entire peninsula in weeks, looks at the American suggestion and just says yes. 30 minutes. A borrowed map. A line drawn through provinces, through valleys, through villages, through a nation 13 centuries old, by 2 men who had never been there, labeled temporary. That word again. We've met it before on this channel. Temporary is the most permanent word in geopolitics. The plan, insofar as 30 minutes produces a plan, was trusteeship. Babysit Korea briefly, then hand it back whole. Then the Cold War arrived, and the babysitter stopped speaking. By 1948, the temporary line had grown a government on each side. In the South, an American-educated 73-year-old exile, Syngman Rhee. Elections held, the North boycotting. In the North, a 36-year-old Soviet-backed guerrilla the world would come to know very well, Kim Il-sung. And now the pattern our series keeps finding. Both new states claimed the entire peninsula. Both constitutions, both maps. Neither accepted the line as a border. Each saw it as a scar across its own body. If you've watched our Taiwan investigation, you know this trap. 2 governments, 1 map, 0 room for compromise. And it was already turning violent. On the southern island of Jeju, an uprising was crushed by Southern forces at a cost of tens of thousands of lives, a wound the South itself only formally acknowledged decades later. The file is honest, or it is nothing. Before the big war ever started, both halves were rehearsing. June 25th, 1950. Dawn. The North invades with Soviet tanks and Stalin's reluctant blessing, expecting a 3-week war. Seoul falls in 3 days. The South is compressed into one corner around Busan and holds. Then September, an amphibious gamble at Incheon, tide so extreme most planners called it impossible, cuts the Northern Army in half. The war flips. UN forces drive north, nearly to the Chinese border. And then China comes in. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And the war flips again. Seoul changes hands 4 times. 4. The last 2 years are trench warfare, almost exactly along the line where everything started, while American bombing levels the North. More bomb tonnage than the entire Pacific War, by the Air Force's own accounting. Cities reduced to statistics. Total dead? Around 3 million, most of them civilians. 10 million family members separated by the front line. And on July 27th, 1953, the shooting stops with an armistice, a ceasefire, not a peace treaty. The South's own president refused to sign it at all. Do the math with me. The border moved, after 3 million deaths, essentially back to where 2 colonels had sketched it. And because no peace was ever signed, the Korean War did not end. It paused. It is still paused. It is the longest ceasefire in human history, and every Korean alive today has spent their entire life inside it. Now, the part of this story almost nobody knows. Ask anyone which Korea won the peace, and they'll point at the lights. But for the first 20 years, the North was winning. Remember the wiring in the walls? The North inherited the factories, the mines, the hydroelectric dams, plus Soviet money. Through the 1960s, by most estimates, the average North Korean was better off than the average South Korean. The South in 1953 was one of the poorest places on Earth, poorer per person than Ghana, surviving on American aid, led by autocrats, first Rhee, then a general named Park Chung-hee, who took power in a coup. Let's be precise, because our file demands it. In 1960, both Koreas were dictatorships, one communist, one anti-communist. Freedom was not yet the difference. If you had stood at the DMZ in 1965 and bet on which half would become a planet of light, the smart money said north. The experiment needed more time, and time had an opinion. Here's what time did. The South, under Park's iron planning, bet everything on exports. Steel it had no iron for, ships it had never built, chips it had never designed. Companies with names you now own things from, Hyundai, Samsung, POSCO, were willed into existence. They call it the miracle on the Han River, and the numbers earn the name. Within 1 generation, a war ruin became a top 10 economy. And then, this is the part that makes it a different story from every other tiger. In 1987, after years of protests, and after the massacre at Gwangju in 1980 that stains the file forever, the South's own people forced the generals out. The dictatorship that built the miracle was retired by the people it fed. The North ran the same decades through the opposite machine. Juche, total self-reliance, hardened into the world's first communist dynasty, father to son to grandson. It worked, after a fashion, as long as Soviet subsidies flowed. In 1991, the Soviet Union died. The subsidies died with it. And in the mid-1990s, the North starved. The state called it the Arduous March. The estimates run from 600,000 dead past 1 million. Same people, same peninsula, same 80 years. One variable changed. That's the experiment, and its result glows from space. So why does the poor half still set the world's pulse racing? Because it solved its survival problem the one way left. It went nuclear. First test, 2006. By 2017, missiles that can reach any city you've ever visited. There were handshakes. 2018, the two leaders actually stepping across the line at Panmunjom, summits in Singapore and Hanoi. Real hope on live television. Denuclearization achieved. 0. The arsenal stayed and grew. And the gap kept widening into numbers that sound made up. The South's economy, roughly 50 times the North's. Same gene pool, and Southern 20-somethings now stand measurably taller than their Northern cousins, because height is what a menu does to a bloodline. The satellite photo isn't a metaphor. It's a bar chart, drawn in electricity. Which brings us to right now, because the final chapter of this story happened while nobody was looking. For 70 years, both Koreas insisted the split was temporary. Reunification was in both constitutions, both anthems' spirit, the name of Pyongyang's own monuments. Then, in January 2024, the North did something no one predicted. It demolished its own arch of reunification. Called the South not a lost half, but a foreign, hostile state. And this May, 2026, it deleted reunification from its constitution entirely. The country that invented the dream tore it down personally and turned north instead, toward Moscow, sending its soldiers to a European war in exchange for the future. And the South? Its own politics gave the world a strange December night of martial law and an impeachment, democracy stress-tested, live. And then it did something quieter. In the polls, year by year, its people began agreeing that one country is no longer the plan. Not in anger, in indifference. The divorce nobody announced. So stand at the line one last time, the most fortified border on Earth, and in the 4 kilometers between the guns, because no human dares walk there. The cranes came back. Bears. Wild orchids in the minefields. The safest place on the peninsula is the war itself. 5 maps hang on our wall now, and this one repeats the series' verdict most cleanly of all. Nothing ancient, nothing inevitable. A 30-minute line, a pause button pressed in 1953, and 2 systems running one people toward 2 futures, while the experiment quietly closed its own file this spring. The lights are still on in the South. The dark is still dark in the North. And the longest ceasefire in human history is still, tonight, holding its breath. The evidence stays open on the desk. Sleep well.